Welcome to Lesson 10, the one where everything you learned about React shifts on its axis. For the last 6 lessons, we built Client React, components that hydrate in the browser, manage state, ship JavaScript. Starting now, the default flips. In React 19, every component runs on the server unless you explicitly opt into the client, meaning 0 JavaScript shipped, direct database access from your components, and a much smaller bundle reaching your users. To get there, we're building 4 mental models in sequence. First, server components, the new default, async with direct database access and 0 JavaScript shipped. Second, the use client directive, which marks the boundary where you opt back into the browser for state and interactivity. Third, use server, actions, server functions you can call straight from client components, no REST endpoint required. And fourth, streaming with Suspense, so a slow widget never blocks a fast layout. Server first, client when needed. That's the whole arc. So let's start with Model 1. A server component is just an async function, no use client at the top, and in React 19 with Next 15, that's the default. The body runs once at request time on the server, which means you can await your database driver directly. No use state, no use effect, no fetch wrapper around an API route that wraps the same query. The browser receives rendered HTML and 0 JavaScript for this component. For static-ish data, this shape quietly obsoletes most of the useFetch hooks you've been writing. Now, the moment you actually need state, an effect, or a click handler, you cross into Model 2. You add useClient at the very top of the file before any imports, and that file plus everything it imports gets shipped to the browser and hydrated. The senior reflex here is critical. Don't slap useClient on your layout. Carve out small islands, like this Add to Cart button, and let the server render everything around them. Lift state down, not up. And once you have islands, you need a way for them to talk back to the server, which brings us to Model 3, use server actions. Drop that directive at the top of a file, and every exported function becomes a remotely callable endpoint. Next.js handles the HTTP, the serialization, the routing, all of it. From the client, you just await add to cart, like it's a local function. One server function replaces what used to be a useMutation hook plus a REST handler plus a fetch wrapper. That brings us to the 4th model, streaming with Suspense. Every async server component is implicitly a suspense boundary, so wrapping a slow child in with a fallback tells React, don't hold up the rest of the page for this one. Here, the header and nav flush in 50 milliseconds while the cart query and the ML recommendations stream in independently behind their skeletons. The user sees layout instantly. That's the pattern behind why Versal and Linear feel almost native. Now, an honest caveat. Everything we've covered, server components, actions, streaming, requires a framework. Vite SPA, the stack we used through lessons 0 to 9, is client-only React. There's no server runtime to render components on. That's not a flaw, it's a choice. If your backend is FastAPI or Django and your front end is pure client React with JWT and TanStack query, Vite SPA is still completely valid in 2026. But when you want RSC, actions, and streaming in one integrated piece, Next.js App Router is the reference implementation, and that's why it's this lesson's stack. So with Next.js as our stage, here are 6 reflexes that separate developers who sprinkle use client everywhere from those who actually think server first. Start every new component without the directive, and only reach for it when you genuinely need state, effects, or browser APIs. Push use client down to the smallest interactive island, an add to cart button, a search box, never the page route. Fetch on the server, pass serialized props down, wrap slow async regions in their own suspense boundaries so the header doesn't wait on the cart. Prefer actions over hand-rolled fetch plus endpoint pairs in greenfield next apps. And after a mutation, call revalidate path. That's your invalidate queries for the server cache. And to keep all of this within arm's reach, here's your Lesson 10 cheat sheet. 12 patterns covering the daily surface area of RSC plus actions. The left column is your server toolkit, async page components, the use server action file, tag and path-based revalidation, redirects. The middle is data and streaming, direct database calls, suspense regions, cached fetches, not found. And the right column is where server meets client, the use client island, cache refresh after mutations, request headers and cookies, plus the loading and error conventions Next.15 wires up for you. Screenshot this one. It's the map for everything we've covered. Now, the cheat sheet shows you what to do. These 5 pitfalls show you what quietly undoes it. Putting use client at the top of a page sends the whole route to the browser. Importing your DB module into a client component leaks secrets and bloats the bundle. Let the server-only package fail the build for you. Passing functions across the boundary breaks because functions don't serialize. Wrap them as server actions instead. Forgetting revalidate path after a mutation leaves users staring at stale data. And reaching for RSC on a highly interactive surface, filters, drag and drop, real-time, means you're refetching on every keystroke when use state plus a query client would simply win. Server by default, client where it earns its keep. Time to put it in your hands. 3 exercises, Next.js 15 or newer. First, build a server product list. Async component, direct DB fetch, then open DevTools, and watch the JS bundle shrink to almost nothing. That's the moment RSC clicks. Second, add an Add to Cart client island nested inside a server product card. Only the button ships to the browser. Third, write an Add to Cart server action with revalidate path and feel how a mutation collapses to a single function. No API route, no useMutation, just the senior shape. And that's Lesson 10. You now own the 4 mental models that define modern React. Server components by default, client islands where interaction lives, server actions for mutations, and suspense for streaming. Server by default, client when needed. Keep that mantra. Next up, Lesson 11. We take this cart UI to production with Vite, Playwright, and a multi-stage Docker file. See you there.